We are not going to medicate or moderate out of this. We have great data, tons of clinical published trials on people reversing type 2 diabetes with lower carbohydrate diets. But if you're very sick, you need to be focusing on what does your body need. If your body has extremely high glucose, your body doesn't need more glucose. And it doesn't matter if it's from an orange or from a Snickers bar. It breaks down to the same thing. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was 5 feet tall and 57.5 pounds. Ended up passing out at school. I just always felt like my brain was constantly running. I couldn't calm it down. And it was my hope that becoming a dietitian and learning more about food, I was like, there has to be something that can give my brain some chill. And go through the traditional dietetics program, and this current system just was so wrong. So my preceptor would be like, okay, we're gonna teach them to eat carbohydrates throughout the day so we can dose them with insulin throughout the day. Even just asking questions like, hey, should we teach them to eat less carbohydrates since our blood glucose is like 400? No, that's not how we do things. These processed foods are sponsoring the academy. So the academy is telling people it's okay to eat these processed foods, especially if you have prediabetes. You have an opportunity to completely reverse this. But if you keep this going, it doesn't end well.
Michelle, as a dietitian, what are your thoughts around the new changes to the dietary guidelines?
Wow. I have mixed thoughts, of course, and for as long as I can remember, that I've thought the old dietary guidelines were flawed, and you didn't have to be like a rocket scientist to know, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be eating 11 slices of bread a day. I love the image. There's been a lot of memes kind of comparing it back to when, South Park did the parody many years ago, having, fat on the bottom. My concern is the image doesn't necessarily match up with what's written. What's written, unfortunately, still says limit saturated fat to 10% or less. And then at this base, you have a steak, which is very high in saturated fat. So I guess it's a good start. Having people just have a basic visual of like, hey, you need to be eating a lot more protein. You need to chill out on a lot of these, processed carbohydrates, grains, and you need to be eating more fruits, vegetables, and oils. Like, you can't go wrong there. As far as, what's written, the implementation, can we teach it? I think that still has yet to be seen.
And when new rules are applied like that, how does that trickle down to doctors, dietitians? Is that something that takes time, or is that instantaneous?
No, I don't know. It certainly sure shit isn't instantaneous. No, not at all. But we haven't had new guidelines, since I was born. I'm 42, and the nutrition guidelines came out in the 80s, and they had little dinky changes like the. Oh, I'm dropping things here. Like the guy like walking up the pyramid, But obviously the hope is, this nutrition pyramid is going to be guiding what we teach in hospitals and clinics and, schools. Thus, we would have more protein, we'd have more vegetables, we would be able to teach limiting carbohydrates for metabolic health. But I honestly, every professional that I've talked to, and I'd be interested if you've talked to somebody maybe that I haven't yet, has kind of the same thoughts that I have. Like, we still don't know. Like, it's still, so, it just very recently came out. But as far as I know, like, no, sweeping changes have happened yet. So I guess it's going to take time.
Yeah, I was just curious because obviously these go deep into school lunches, jails, what's being fed to inmates, and even liability for healthcare professionals. So I'm just curious from your perspective, if the next day you get this email and it says, this is what we need to start saying to people.
I didn't get any emails. No dietitian that I've talked to has gotten any emails. So that's the thing, is it's like, we have this change, but I think just like a lot of big policy changes, like when something major happens and we don't have a precedent, it's like nobody really knows, like, what do we do next? How do we incorporate this? And so I think that will be the next steps to see, like, okay, now that we have this, are we allowed to actually teach people about this? And then, coming back to it, like, could we teach people about purely ketogenic diets if they're high in saturated fat? Because even though, like, you see the steak at the base of the pyramid, the guidelines still technically say that you have to limit saturated fat to 10% or less. And, reading through some of the language of the guidelines, it's still a little bit confusing about how much fruits and vegetables and grains to have. It doesn't necessarily match up to that visual image. And so I think everybody everybody that I've talked to are a little bit kind of like waiting for clarification, like, okay, what do we do next? Because, as excited as I was to see a change, and I know many other people were, just to see like movement in the right direction. Now it's like, okay, well, can we implement this? How do we implement this? Because like you said, most of us would love to go just running and be like, all right, let's go talk to all our diabetics. Let's talk to people and get everybody on the same page here. But there's a liability, you can't say like, oh, hey, wait, you can't teach this yet, or you have to teach it but this way. So yeah, I think we're all at a little bit of a standstill on like what to do next. But I think at least we have like an image to point people to, saying like, look, this this is closer to human what we believe, is a healthy diet for humans. So is it a step in the right direction? Yes. What can we do with it on a clinical level, hospital level, federal level? I don't think we know yet.
You've brought up saturated fat a couple times. That is still a big fear for a lot of people who are stepping into a lower carb, keto, carnivore diet. Let's bust that myth right up front.
Yeah, I love, when I was a young dietitian, as I'm sure many people on your podcast have talked about, I was just told like it was very black and white, unsaturated fat, good for you. Saturated fat clogs your arteries. You had all these very dramatic images of like butter and beef and, this causes this occluded artery. And, I even remember watching a video in high school of, the scientists like cutting into plaque and being like, look, there's LDL in there. And it was like saturated fats cause LDL to increase. And so you have all this fear around LDL and LDL increasing. And, of course, that's caused, an explosion of people to be prescribed statin drugs and with the goal of like reducing LDL. So it's very unfortunate because, as I wrote about in my book, and I know many other people have talked about, LDL cholesterol in general is so important. Like it's the foundation of your cell membranes. It's important in hormone production. We have very good data, and not just like, 100 people study, like meta-analysis of hundreds of thousands of people, that the higher someone's LDL was, especially as they age, the less risk of infection they have. LDL is important in your immune system. The less risk of cognitive decline. So here we are lowering LDL and then potentially giving people a risk of not only getting an infection, but having dementia and Alzheimer's and other issues. So, just like so many other things in nutrition, you can't look at things in a context is very important. And I think most people kind of know that on a surface level, but I always encourage people to understand it. Ask your doctor, ask your dietitian, like, why do I need to do this? Tell me, explain it to me. And it's pretty unfortunate that a lot of dietitians can't. Oh, LDL is bad. You need less. That's not an explanation. Talk to me about the mechanism. So let's break it down, like you said. Okay. LDL, very important in the body, but we see it get stuck in arteries. Why does it get stuck? It has all these important functions. So is it taking, is it doing its job, ringing, has so many functions in the body, and then all of a sudden just be like, hey, I'm mad. I'm clogging your arteries. No, it's not like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. You have to have some type of inflammation and oxidation within the arterial walls. So what causes that? We know the number one cause of that is high blood sugar over time, right? Hyperglycemia. That's why type 2 diabetics have an extremely high risk of heart disease. It really goes hand in hand. And unfortunately, the higher A1C goes, it tends to be your risk goes up. I mean, some people, A1Cs of 10, 12, 14, your risk can be like sixfold of having a heart attack. And it's like, it's not because your LDL, it's because your blood sugar is so high. You've got this inflammation and oxidation. The solution isn't to necessarily lower your LDL. The solution is to get rid of that inflammation and oxidation. And of course, there are other things that cause, inflammation. There's certainly autoimmune disorders. There's other factors. But unfortunately, my overwhelming experience being in this field now for 16 years is prediabetes and diabetes is rampant. When I was a kiddo, like in high school and stuff, we used to call it was childhood onset and adult onset. Now now it's type 1 and type 2, because the youngest person I saw in the clinic that had type 2 diabetes was 8. Now I'm seeing working with Ona Health, I've seen people, in their teens and 20s with prediabetes and full-blown diabetes.
Well, I think this is going to be a general theme, this metabolic dysfunction throughout the conversation. You've already connected it to heart disease, but let's take a step back and talk about somebody eating to the old food pyramid. And when they up their carbs, what that does with the blood glucose. And over time, if they do that chronically, the effects on insulin and the damage that does throughout the body.
Yeah. And this is also where I think context is important, because the more, studies and research, and we have some very good, just even anecdotal populations that just eat a very high carbohydrate diet that are really healthy. I was very fortunate when I was 20 years old. I went to Kenya for 6 weeks and had to run with the distance runners. It was it was magical. It was in a very rural area, and we probably ate, I don't know, 20 grams of protein a day. It was very, rice, but everything was grown. There was the no processed carbohydrates at all, right? And we were also, the group I was with, we were running. That was the first time in my life I'd run, 100 miles a week. So you're running an incredible distance. But the absence of any seed oils, any, hydrogenated oils, any processed foods, people getting lots of sunlight, people with good community, I saw minimal metabolic dysfunction during my time there. But you come back to America, people aren't eating whole food carbohydrates. It's pretty rare that I meet someone who's very sick, type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, fatty liver, PCOS, cancer, all these things are under the umbrella of metabolic dysfunction, that says, oh, I'm eating sweet potatoes and brown rice and chicken. It's like people are eating these donuts and breads and cookies and crackers and all these things that have just been so ultra processed, over time, that it just caused rampant dysfunction. And so I think there has to be some type of conversation around that. What could you be a metabolically healthy person eating a much higher carbohydrate diet if it was all whole food carbohydrates, you kept your fat really low, you ate a lot of clean protein? Probably. But once you are sick, which unfortunately is a lot of the population, the type 2 diabetics that I see, like they're so sick, they can't even tolerate like an apple. Their blood sugar is going to go too high. Does that mean they can never eat an apple again? No, that just means that we really have to get their carbohydrates down. Like we have to the end is completely full. Their muscles, their liver, everything is saturated with glucose. And so, I kind of forgot what your actual question was. Is like gone off on a tangent here.
Well, let's get into mechanism as that's happening. Somebody who is having too much sugar, too many carbs, blood glucose is high chronically.
Yes.
The damage that the elevated blood glucose does throughout the body, and then the elevated insulin.
Yeah, and it's gnarly. Like, I've seen... working in acute care really started to break me, because you saw many things that were preventable, and you saw people being given information that was going to cause them to continue to suffer. And let me give you a few examples. I think a lot of people kind of assume like, oh, people in the hospital, they're 70, they're 80, they're 90. Not necessarily. I saw a gentleman with severe cardiovascular failure who was 28. I saw a person that needed a kidney transplant at 35 due to severe type 2 diabetes. I literally had a gentleman who was, 51, who was in the ICU, and he was massively septic. And as I'm reading through his chart, he had stepped on a piece of glass a week ago. And his peripheral neuropathy was so bad, he couldn't feel it, which is another consequence of type 2 diabetes, right? You lose feeling in your legs. So this shard of glass had implanted and caused a massive infection, and he didn't even know it. Like, that's how sick some of these people are. And so type 2 diabetes, and this is, when I talk to my younger people, and I consider anyone younger than me young, right? 30s and 20s. I'm not saying this to scare you, but I'm saying this so like, this will ruin your life, and especially if you have prediabetes, you have an opportunity to completely reverse this. But if you keep this going, it doesn't end well. You're going to have, your teeth are going to rot. You're going to have kidney failure. You die of a heart attack. You're not going to be able to feel your limbs. You're going to be weak because your body can't actually use the fuel you're eating. It is a horrible way to live, but it's also incredibly reversible. I had a gentleman, Jesse, his A1C was 10. So for reference, if people are new to your show, we want you to be under 5.7. 5.7 to 6.5 is pre-diabetes. Damage is being done. This is like your body, like the sirens are going off. Above 6.5, you have full-blown diabetes. And so this gentleman was 10, not good. And he literally said, though, like, tell me what to do. I will do it as strict as possible. A Nigerian gentleman, a really nice guy. He had his family back in Nigeria. Said, I am their supporter. I have to be well. And so we put him on a very strict low-carb diet. And, a lot of times people struggle. They argue with you. They don't want to give up foods. I've never seen somebody so on it. And he got his labs tested 71 days, not even 3 months later. His A1C was 5.4. So we went from 10. And he had seen other doctors and dietitians, and they wanted to put him on meds, and they wanted to do this nonsense consistent carb diet. And in 71 days, he no longer has diabetes. Doesn't have pre-diabetes. He also lost like 25 pounds too.
A big part of the problem as somebody's heading into these waters we've been discussing, metabolic dysfunction, prediabetes, insulin resistance, is the fact that so much of this is taking place silently in the body over a number of years. And oftentimes it's not till you're really far down the line and you have something like diabetes that you find out that there's a problem. Can you explain what's happening in that 10 to 15 years in the body, physiology-wise, as things are breaking before they get to that full-blown type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, what's really hard is I think a lot of people, unfortunately, function at such a poor baseline that they don't really even realize they're sick. A lot of, I also have had the privilege to work with, young women with like eating disorders, anorexia and osteoporosis. Most of the time you don't know you're losing bone density until it's fracture hit, right? And so same thing is very similar with pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. You're just going along and you're just like, I don't know, I'm a busy person and you don't really know. But, there are obviously some warning signs, gaining fat, especially gaining like belly fat. People often will say they feel incredibly fatigued. The idea of exercise seems overwhelming. Some gentlemen deal with erectile dysfunction, women have PCOS. But as far as like the damage that's starting, your body does not, there's so many mechanisms to keep your blood sugar at a stable level. Like your body does not want to have elevated blood glucose because that changes the pH of your blood, which once again is very dangerous. And so you're causing all kinds of inflammation in various areas, whether it can be, the arterioles of your eyes, it can be with your kidneys, it can be with your heart. And sometimes it depends genetically. People that might have more of a genetic predisposition to store fat as visceral fat. You might be potentially setting yourself up for a heart attack, even if you're relatively young. I've unfortunately had people that had arteries that were like 50% blocked and they're in their 30s. Oh my God. So there's so many things that could potentially be happening that you might not even know. And of course, our terrible original food guidelines. And then you have the food industry that just makes all these convenient, easy processed foods. Then we have a society that just, supports. It's not even, it's the most unusual phenomenon that as a society, we really support food addiction and we support being fat and we support, hey, if you can't work because you're too fat, we'll just put you on disability and we'll feed you. And I'm not trying to be, too rude or whatever, but I've seen it. I worked in some long-term care places. I worked in lots of hospitals, and that should not be the solution. The solution should be, you're obese, you're weight of these issues. We need to help you. We need to set you up to get you well, So it's really, really unfortunate just how the system is set up still.
You quickly mentioned their visceral fat, and this is the fat that's deep within the abdomen, the dangerous fat that somebody can be accumulating and not even really notice the difference looking in the mirror. So another invisible thing happening under the hood that can be causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, and wouldn't it be wild? I was talking to a friend about this because you can't really know how much visceral fat. And thank you for pointing that out because we have two types of fat, right? We have subcutaneous, like the fat kind of like around, you can see around like your arms or whatever. and then the visceral fat, which is the fat around our organs. And that's the much more dangerous. And getting a DEXA scan, which of course shows your bone density and muscle mass, but also shows fat and visceral fat. Like, what if once a year everybody had to get lab tests, and ideally you get lab tests maybe twice a year, but sometimes we see people that have had lab tests in 10 to 15 years. And so being able to keep an eye on your numbers, track your numbers, that would be ideal.
If somebody wants to get objective with this and get lab testing done to see their baseline and then track over time, you mentioned the HbA1c. Would you look at that as part of a bigger panel to assess?
100%. I love that a lot of healthcare providers, especially in this space, has started recommending fasting insulin, because I have a few people that I've worked with that their A1C was normal, and I'm talking like, I give a gentleman, 52. He's like a little taller than me. I want to say 5'9", and he's 400 pounds. And so you would think like, this guy's got to be diabetic. Nah, A1C is 5.3. Well, let's get your fasting insulin tested. Oh, it's 65. For reference, I think Tro like says you had under like 10 or 12. I mean, theoretically, I think it's like it goes up to 20 is kind of the max range. But most healthy humans, we want it, I would say, under 12, under 10. Because when you have your pancreas pumping, his pancreas is pumping out so much insulin that it's actually it looks like his blood sugar is normal. But what is insulin too? Insulin is a fat storage hormone. It's taking all that carbohydrates he's eating and it's storing them as fat because his cells are completely saturated. You can't store it as carbohydrate anymore. And so fasting insulin is a very important piece of the puzzle. And so this guy who's been told by doctors, like, no, you're not diabetic. No, you're fine. No, you're not fine. Your fasting insulin is through the roof. And if you have an amazing ability to store fat. If we were in a famine, you'd be great. We're not in a famine, and you're going to kill yourself if we don't make some changes here. But the good news is, despite, your fasting insulin, despite your blood glucose, despite usually people like that have very high triglycerides as well. And we can reverse that. We just have to change how you're eating.
To me, as we're talking, there's 3 different areas that are jumping out at me that are a big part of this problem. One being the social acceptance of being fat, which you mentioned. 2, the dietary guidelines, at least up until now, have been telling people to eat carbs, a lot of carbs, to stay healthy, which is backwards. And then 3, the fact that a lot of this is going on hidden until somebody gets to that type 2 diabetes. So to me, it's this 3-prong disaster that has led us to where we are.
May I add a prong? May I add an additional prong?
Please do.
I'm passionate about what people think, believe, and perceive. Because how you think about situations, your mindset, I tell you what, I've seen people with, like my gentleman that I just said with that A1C, had less resources than a lot of people I work with and had more success because he said, you tell me what to do and I'll be damned if I don't do it. Like, I will do everything. And, we meet with these people every week and, hey, have you had any struggles? Have you fallen off? What do you mean have I had any struggles? I did exactly what had such a, iron will, had that self-belief that I can do this. I will do this. I am capable of do this. So many people are so tired and they feel like society, that their jobs have beat them down, maybe their relationships, whatever, that they just, I can't do this. I've tried all these diets. Just give me the meds, whatever. You have to have that strong self-belief because life is hard. Anybody who's listening to this, have things with their family, things with finances, things that you have to believe that I will figure this out. And where I got to, it's not my parents' problem. It's not my spouse's problem. It's not the government's problem. It is my problem. Where you put the blame, you put your power. I can fix this and I will fix this. And just every day, every meal, that's very passionate about how you think because that's the only way you're going to overcome. It's just too easy to fail. Society literally sets you up. Like, you can't go anywhere without crappy food. So.
Okay, so far we've talked about lab tests. We mentioned that people can notice weight gain as they're heading down this path, but not always. What other symptoms can somebody look at without going to the doctor, other than the weight gain piece, if they have it, to see if they're headed down this path?
I often find that people are unusually fatigued, at various places. If you start your day, I'm just going to do a hypothetical time at 6, and if you're exhausted at 10, and then again at 2, and you're just like slamming coffee and carbs to get through the day, that is not a good sign. If you notice when you have carbohydrates, let's say you're just like, oh God, I don't want to go to work, and you have a granola bar or something very high in carbs and you feel really good, like you kind of feel, that's also not a good sign. You're riding that blood sugar roller coaster up and down. We want to be stable. You should feel good and level most of the time. If you are unable to do cardio for 10 minutes, if the idea of going for an up-tempo 10-minute walk is like, no, I can't do that. Like, we should all be able to, you know, do 15 to 20 minutes. I'm not saying you need to go run an ultra marathon. Who does that? That's insane. Hashtag me. But you do need to be able to do something to get your heart rate up. Like, if you're to the point where getting your heart rate up for 1 or 2 minutes, you're just like, that's not a good sign, you know?
So you added another prong, the ownership piece to this. I'm going to add one more prong. The fact that people need to know that they can get better. With a lot of these chronic health conditions, you go to the doctor, you go to the dietitian, and conventionally we're told that the best we can do is medicate and prevent going further down the line. Throughout our conversation, I hope to get into the nuance here of the fact that depending where you are, there's a lot of hope here and you can reverse some of this stuff.
That is like my message to people, like the human body and brain, because there's a lot of people that are listening to this, or that themselves or their families or their children are severe anxiety, severe depression, suicidal ideation. The human body and the human brain have a tremendous capacity to heal, greater than anybody has ever allowed you to believe. Your doctor, even like potentially you might read it in the Bible and you're like, that's impossible. No, it's not. But you have to fuel it correctly, and like you said, you go to a doctor, gosh, and this is the problem. And, I say this very respectfully because I know doctors, I know many doctors. My 2 oldest sisters are doctors, right? So, but you have 5 to 7, maybe 10 minutes with the person. They're going as fast as they can. They're trying to type. They're giving you meds. They're telling you good luck. You might see them at 6 months. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? That's not actually helping you move forward. You need to understand how to get better. And just like you said, I think that's very important. You need to truly believe that you can get better and take ownership of that. Because often, I was told as a young human that people don't really recover from anorexia. Like, you're going to have this the rest of your life. It's going to rule your life. You're going to have to become kind of this high functioning person that's constantly dealing with racing thoughts around food and, obsessing about that and worrying about that. And when we tell people this, they believe it. Hey, you have type 2 diabetes. You're just going to have to take insulin your whole life, and you're probably going to get sicker, but we're going to manage it. We're going to do our best we can so you don't get too much worse. What total nonsense. But people have to realize, and I know this isn't going to be like news to people who listen to your podcast, that this is a business. And if you get better, I don't make money off of you. I can't heal you because then I lose you as a customer. I also can't kill you because then I lose you as a customer. I have to keep you perpetually sick. And that's the business model of our healthcare system. Kind of blows. So we have to rise above that and say, like, no, we believe we can get better. We have more than, tons of clinical evidence we can get better. And so we're going to take those steps every day and get better.
Another piece we can add on is having a why. And you talk about this in your book. We need to know we can get better. And then we need to really get down in the nitty gritty and find out what's at the root of our why to get better, which is going to give us so much momentum on this journey.
Yeah. And, I've talked to, interestingly, talking to more people about this. If you're struggling with the why, like I've had people say, like, I just don't have a reason. And, once again, working with a lot of mental health patients, sometimes our why can be very simple. Like, okay, let's table that. Give me one thing that you think you might want in the future. Like, it doesn't have to be, because I do think it's good to have a profound why. Like, hey, I love myself. I want to do this. But if you're struggling finding a why, okay, maybe someday I'd like to adopt a kitten. That'd be cool. All right. Like, we don't have to find this profound why, because we do have to act. Like, action, motivation always comes before, after action. Because people get that backwards. Oh, I'm going to go to the gym when I feel motivated. Okay, guess what? You're never going to the gym. If I ran when I was motivated, I'd run like, I don't know, 1 day a month. It's hard. So you have to decide, like, I'm going to do this. Action always matters. But yes, if you can't find this profound dramatic why, start with, you know what? it'd be really cool to like myself. It'd be really cool to have a partner. It'd be really find anything to get you started.
You mentioned mental health, and I know that was a struggle for you along your journey. I think at this point, before we get into more of the nuances here around diet and nutrition, is to talk about your story that goes way back. And let's take our time and explain what you've gone through to get to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. So when I was 12, that's really where my health journey began. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I believe now it's just called anorexia. I was 5 feet tall and 57.5 pounds. Ended up passing out at school. It's hard as an adult because I'm kind of like, gosh, And my niece, my sister's kids were over earlier this year, and Natalie's like 4'10" and is like 75 pounds, and she's so tiny. I'm like, how did my parents miss this, right? But people have to remember, like, it was just a different time. Like, we didn't all have cell phones and all this other stuff, right? But anyway, so I went to inpatient treatment, 2 months, immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And, ingredients of tube feeding back then are very similar to what they are today. Corn syrup, maltodextrin, soy protein, canola oil, very inflammatory, very high calorie, and was put on the standard American diet, and they step you up. And it was very hard. I had all kinds. My bad anxiety went like through the roof, but I was heavily medicated. I was put on 7 different medications. I don't remember a lot of my time in treatment, to be honest. I was pretty zonked out most of the time. But I did become weight restored, and um, I remember the doctor saying, like I said earlier, like, hey, people with anorexia, it's not a disease that you can fully recover from. Like, you're always going to have this struggle, you're going to have to fight it every day. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, this is awful. And they weren't totally wrong. I went to finish middle school, went to high school, and it seemed like most people were able to like hang out and eat and not worry. And I was just constantly thinking and worrying about food. And, um, I before my eating disorder, I played soccer. So I was really hopeful to do athletics again and, tried out for the basketball team and got cut. And the coach was like, you're going to have to do PE. I was like, I don't want to do PE. And so she was like, well, you could do running cross country. I'd never heard of that. I was familiar with track and field, and pretty quickly found like, hey, I've got a knack for this, and I always encourage people with eating disorders, can you find something else to put your energy into? And we can go into the nuances of, is extreme cardio a good idea or not? But yeah, I did really well. Ended up winning the state championship, and ran in college. Unfortunately, I had a severe stress fracture, and that ended my college career. And through my adolescence and early adulthood, I wanted to be a dietitian. I finished my degree through Kansas State University. I went to Oregon, OHSU, Oregon Health Science University, for my internship. But I just had this chronic anxiety and depression, and I didn't really develop super healthy coping mechanisms. Ended up engaging in a lot of self-injury, was in a lot of bad relationships, had a very bad marriage. Um, and I just always felt like my brain was constantly running, like I couldn't quite calm it down. And it was my hope that becoming a dietitian or learning more about food, I was like, there has to be something that can give my brain some chill. But, as we've talked about, you go through the traditional dietetics program, and this current system just was so wrong. We'd go into the room with someone with type 2 diabetes. My preceptor would be like, okay, we're going to teach them to eat carbohydrates throughout the day so we can dose them with insulin throughout the day. And even just asking questions like, hey, should we teach them to eat less carbohydrates since their blood glucose is like 400? You're considered like, no, that's not how we do things. And in the ICU, all these tube feeding ingredients. I'm like, oh my God, that was the same that I was fed when I was a kid. It's still full of shit. That I was 24, I'm 42 now. It's the same. And who knows, maybe that will improve. They do have better formulas, but to my knowledge, they're not covered by insurance. So let's say hypothetically you're in the hospital and you're like, I don't want the crappy formula. It's like, hope you got $1,200 a day out of pocket. Like, it's not cheap. Um, yeah. And so after becoming a dietitian, I was also an endurance athlete, and it was hard. It was hard because you see this cycle of sickness. People weren't getting better. And that starts to wear on you. I don't care what anybody says. Like, even though you're making a salary, for the first time in my life, I finally had some financial stability. But it was like you just saw people being sick and you're asking these questions like, my God, like I'm telling them to eat low fat and all these whole grains, and they say they're doing it, but they're not getting better. And it really wasn't until, I kind of had my own health crisis in 2019 that I completely was like, okay, like, we gotta totally make a change here because this is clearly not working.
So up until 2019, as a dietitian, it sounds like there may have been some cracks there where you're thinking a bit differently, but were you pretty sold on conventional thinking?
I would say, and the eating disorder world too, it's just so drilled into you that like all foods fit all the time in all situations. Not eating something is considered an eating disorder, and I, of course, wanted to be well, wanted to feel like, okay, I'm a healthier person. And I noticed that anytime I would eat like really processed foods, like let's just say, have some cookies or a piece of cake or something, I'm a lean human. I've been relatively lean my whole life. But I would just, my gosh, it would just feel like my brain was running. Like I would be really anxious and kind of extra, kind of like shaky. But you're told like, oh, that's all in your head. Oh, that's not right, And then you read these articles on type 2 diabetes and, oh, we just need to, they shouldn't be eating saturated fat. We need to give them whole grains. And it's, it's tough because once again, I don't think I can fully describe just how poor the education is for dietitians. And, now that I'm, been able to step back and have been in the low carb space for a while, you see, it's like, this is a crazy conspiracy. We teach all the doctors just to prescribe meds. We teach the dietitians how to keep people sick. It's terrible because we have great data, tons of clinical published trials on people reversing type 2 diabetes with lower carbohydrate diets. Like my 6-year-old niece can look at a graph and be like, hey, look, carbs make your blood sugar go up. Protein, fat don't. Maybe we shouldn't have more of the mountain ones, the carbs. But dietitians we're very hesitant to change. And once again, there is some nuance to this because people didn't want to get all black and white. Everybody should be low carb all the time. No, of course not. But we have a population now that is incredible metabolic illness. So we have these tools we can use that we've shown can reverse these metabolic diseases. So why are we not doing that? Why are we not doing that first before we prescribe medications to people? Like that's my big thing. I mean, I know why we're not. It's, money, but we should be. That's the right thing to do.
So you mentioned this crisis with your health in 2019. Give me the lead up to that and then what went on there.
Yeah, so in 2019, I wanted to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So because it would have been in 2020. And to run in the marathon at that time, and this is just the trials, not the actual Olympics, you had to run under 2 hours and 48 minutes for women. And so my fastest time was 2:54. So I was training a lot, running probably between 70 and 80 miles a week, but real intense, super intervals, tempo runs. And it just kind of felt like my body wasn't recovering well. And I'd had issues in the past with anemia and low iron. So I got my labs checked and everything was fine. I want to say my magnesium was a tiny bit low, but I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I shouldn't be feeling this poorly. And at the time I was also working in the hospital, in Portland, Oregon. And so, I reached out to a few dietitians. I was like, hey, do you think I should do anything else? Kind of gave them the breakdown of my diet. And everybody said, like, you need more calories, you need more carbs. And at that time, I was already eating a lot of carbohydrates. I want to say 350, 400 grams. Oh, you need 500 grams, you need more. And so, I'm trying. So all right, let's do it. Started eating more carbohydrates. And I've had people ask me, were you eating, lots of sugar, lots of processed foods? No, not really. I ate a lot of oats. I ate a lot of sweet potatoes. I did have some things like granola bars. But most of my diet was pretty, you consider, clean. And it just felt like things went from bad to worse in like a relatively short period of time. I would say within several weeks, like I was getting dizzy. I remember driving to work and all of a sudden I was like breaking out in a cold sweat and I had to like pull over. I was like, what is going on? And then, the come to Jesus moment. At the time working at the hospital I was working at, I floated. So meaning I covered several different floors and I was covering oncology. and we had a relatively young patient pass away. And it was just one of those days where it's just like, talking to the other dietitians, like, "Yeah, you care if I go home early? Like, I'm having a day." Like, "No, we got you. Go ahead." So I came home early, was lying on the couch, and I like fell asleep like in the middle of the afternoon. And I don't remember anything. Obviously, my wife, had come home and went to bed. I woke up at like 3 in the morning, like hours and hours later. And it just felt like my body was on fire. Like everything hurt. And here I am. I'm like, look, I'm doing everything right. I'm eating whole grains. I'm, running. I'm trying to chase my dream. And I don't know what to do. Like I literally was out of answers. And so, standing in the kitchen, kind of like tapping my foot, like about to burst into tears, like, I got to get this inflammation down. So I ended up driving to the gas station. I got all this ice, I put in this ice bath. I want to say it was like 30 pounds of ice. And, 3 in the morning, I'm here crying in an ice bath. And that's when my wife came in and was like, maybe you should do something different. And then I was like, yeah, we absolutely should. Like, I should. Because, of course, when you don't feel well, you're not a super nice person either. I was sure I was short with her. I wasn't as patient with my patients. I just constantly felt like I was on edge. And I didn't like who I was becoming. I'm like, this isn't me. I'm normally patient. I'm normally kind. I'd like to think I'm normally pretty compassionate. I'm a good listener. So I decided then I was going to give up running. I'm like, okay, 36. We had our fun. We did lots of marathons, had a great go. So like, let's just lock in and, be a good dietitian. And so then I was like, well, if I'm gonna, not run, I should probably chill out on my carbohydrates. And that kind of went from like, okay, well, maybe I'll do a ketogenic diet to maybe I should try like a full carnivore diet, seeing some stuff online. And that seems so weird and so foreign to me because I mean, I'm eating 500 carbs to go to 0 and just really focus on protein and fat, all these things that you've been taught, indoctrinated. Oh, your heart's going to explode. Oh, you're not going to have any energy. Yeah. And, I decided I was going to do it. And I can't tell you why I felt so compelled to do it. I'm usually somebody who like when I do something, I really want to do it. But my wife was like, "No, this is a bad idea. Like, this is eating disorder. This will set you back." So we fought about it. And finally, she's like, "Do whatever you want. You're gonna quit." And the first week was bad. Like, in the first few days, like, going from, extreme carbs to low carbs, I would tell somebody, like, whew. I mean, and I didn't know. I didn't know, like, man, make sure you have a lot of salt and electrolytes. I'm just drinking water and eating meat. I remember one day driving home. I think the traffic lights, like, were hurting my head. Like, it was not fun. But once I got past that, it was like for the first time in my life, I felt very calm. Like I remember just being able to kind of sit peacefully, which was very unusual. I remember we were in a meeting at work and one of my coworkers was kind of freaking out. She was hungry and I was like, "Oh, we'll eat at noon. That's when we eat." She's like, "It's almost 2." Like I couldn't go for more than a few hours without eating. And so all these things in my life started to change. Like I noticed all these positive changes. Like my mind feels better. I'm sleeping. I don't hurt. And at first I'm like, well, I'm not running, and I'm eating a lot of protein, but nothing made sense. And so just like many people, who try low carb diets and feel better, I started to do the research. And this is, 2019 and coming across all these papers by, you know, um, Jeff Volek and Steve Finney and Eric Westman. I was like, what? They reverse insulin resistance, or they drop someone from like 150 units of insulin off insulin in 15 days, like these magical things. And that's when I was like, okay, I gotta explore this more. There's something to this.
Okay, so to make sure I have the story right here, you have this crisis moment. You really cut down on carbs. It sounded like you went carnivore, correct?
For like 30
Or
days, then more
ish.
like keto-ish, yeah.
Okay. What happened with work at that time? You're practicing as a dietitian. You're going into work by day and you're told to tell people eat a lot of carbs. Talk about work and the pivot there.
Yeah, and at first, because it's like anything else, I'm not totally sold on this. I just know something is happening. So I just kind of went through, did my job, didn't really say anything. But once I started to like really feel better, that's when I was like, okay, that's when I don't know if unfortunately is the right word, but I had this like major disconnect I remember, I think it was like the third week into the diet, when I came home, Corinne's my wife, had beat me home. And she's like, I need to talk to you, which is, if you're married and your spouse is like, I need to talk to you, it's not always a good thing. But she's like, hey, look, your anxiety is the best it's been in the 11 years I've known you. Like something is going on. And she's a scientist. She's super smart. She's like, we need to really dive into this. And so as we dove into it and dove into the research and stuff, it was like, gosh, this has potential, looking at the, oncology studies and type 2 diabetes. And so that's when I very naively thought like, hey, what if I could change where I work? What if I could change the hospital system? What if we could start teaching this to people? What if we could start even having like a, cohort of people who do this? And so, I took like a week and got all the published studies and highlighted, and I wrote out like what we could do, these handouts we could do. And I took it to our clinical director, who looked at me like I had lobsters crawling out of my ears and was just like, that's great. I'm so glad you're doing something you like. But no, I mean, didn't even give me the time of day, just like, but it had to do with the guidelines, with insurance reimbursement, with legality, liability. And that's when, I really, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like before, if you don't know what you don't know. So before it's like, well, I felt like I was doing the right thing with the education I was providing. But now it was clear that like, this could really help a lot of people, at least be a tool to get people to reverse some of these metabolic illnesses. So I need to at least have the option to teach these people this. And then at the time, I started listening to a lot of the work of like Chris Palmer and Georgia Ede. And I was like, man, this even could be powerful in mental illnesses. And so, yeah, I knew my time at the hospital, I knew I wasn't going to be able to be there long term, just because I felt like, man, I can't keep giving people poor information.
So what was your specific journey out of that? And then where are you today?
Yeah. So, I will neither confirm nor deny that I might have started going to people's rooms and saying like, hey, I have to give this to you in chart that this is what we're talking about. But would you like to know what I think could actually really help you? And most people were like, yeah, I want to know what can actually help me. But one guy with severe type 2 diabetes, really, and giving people are a lot smarter, I think, than we give them credit for, right? Too, saying like, hey, glucose is high. We're going to take out things that cause your glucose to be high. Like, what do you know? This guy got really excited and told his nurse. And then the nurse told my boss. And my boss was like, yeah, this is your one warning. Like, this is a fireable offense. You're suspended. Don't do that again. And then COVID hit. So I was actually one of the newer dietitians to the hospital. And so I lost all my dietitian hours. But they're like, oh, don't worry. We're going to put you in the call center. What does that mean? So at the hospital system I work at, it's a room service system. So people call in to order food. They're like, oh, so for 8 hours, type 2 diabetics are going to call in and order brownies and caramel macchiatos. And you're not allowed to give any dietary advice. You're just inputting it in a computer, Oh my gosh, I can't tell you. Driving home, I would just be in tears. It was terrible. And so, basically sat down with my wife and we're like, when can I financially leave? Because this is ridiculous. And I should say, like, in between, patients, in between calls at the call center, anytime I had like a free moment, I was taking notes. I was writing. I was researching. I was like, I'm going to publish a book about how effed up this is and what actually helps people get better. And I left. Finally we looked at our finances and it was like, okay, you can leave or maybe find a part-time job. And so, I went from making, I don't know, like $30 an hour to minimum wage making sausage at a place called Scratch Meats. And it was fun. It was good for my soul, very hard physical labor, but great people doing, sourcing from regenerative farms, and felt like something I could get behind at the time. And it gave me time. It was probably the time in my life when I was only working part-time, wasn't really running that much. So I just wrote every free minute I had. Yeah. And then, the rest, I started feeling so much better and I was home more, that I think Corinne just made like an off comment, like, oh, you're annoying me. You should go for a run. And I hadn't run for quite a while at that time. I'd kind of given up on being competitive. And I was like, well, I'll go run. Like, what's the big deal? It's good for you. Go run a couple of miles. And I ended up going for like an hour. And at that point, still very, very low carb. And, I got the wheels spinning Poor Corinne. She's like, oh, this will be great. We'll go to a trail. You'll run a couple miles. I'll take pictures. I'm like, what if I could be an ultra runner? Like those people can oxidize a lot of fat. Like maybe I could run like 50 miles. She's like, God, here we go. Um, but yeah, I connected with Zach Bitter. He had the 100-mile world record at the time and, was following a really low carb diet. And we kind of talked about the nuances of that and could that work? So we kind of did hey, let me train this way for a little bit. Let me just see if this is sustainable. And then, give me a few months. And if I'm feeling okay, let's connect. Let's see if we can you know, do a race. Like help me run a race. But it was COVID. So it was like, all right, I was feeling good. So we had a race planned for May and then that got canceled. And it's like, all right, well, I have this race planned for August and that got canceled. But thankfully I did end up doing my first ultra in November of 2020 and that did not get canceled. So yeah. And it was really interesting to me how I was able just to teach my body to oxidize a lot more fat for fuel, even at, faster paces and higher heart rates and use carbohydrates more as like a lever, as something to make sure my glycogen was replaced and to use it as, supporting myself when running, but it wasn't like I was having massive amounts before running, during running, and after running. And that worked for me that worked for me. I've been very lucky. I've had several, lucky is the wrong word. I've been very disciplined and I've had several race wins. Yeah, it's nuanced though. My coach Zach now is experimenting with a higher carb approach. I might play with that a little bit, as a metabolically healthy athlete. I think you need to go and do as your body evolves. Yeah, but I've been fortunate, since leaving the hospital setting. I've written The Dietitian's Dilemma is my first book. I wrote a children's book called The Fox Family Food Fight. We use the profits from those books to buy beef from our local farmer here, Will and Jocelyn from Windy River Livestock, and then donate that either to the Share House or the Fish. The Share House is a homeless shelter where I volunteer at. The Fish is just like a food pantry, but they can actually take frozen food, which is cool. Just because, man, I hate that. I've always hated, even when I was a younger human, that just food pantries are just so full of a lot of crap. It's like these people need good nutritious, dense food. They need protein, and it's like, oh, here's your candy bars and cereal. So that's something I'm really proud of. Yeah. And now I do some one-on-one consults. I was recently working for Ona Health. It's been hard. Like I tell you, leaving the hospital, I wish I could tell you like, man, since I left, it's been like a wonderful, fruitful, lucrative journey. No, it's definitely not. Very fortunate to have a partner that has a good job, but it's been a really beautiful journey because I know that I've helped a lot of people now.
I've heard you talk about the fact that as a dietitian, you don't need to register with the Academy of Nutrition. And before you pivoted ways with your career, you've never been registered with them. Obviously, you're still a dietitian. But because now you're working with these clients one-on-one, because you're still a dietitian, are you handcuffed at all by the conventional thinking? Liability-wise.
Not that I know. I keep waiting for them to come around. Where it gets a little hairy is if you are doing like insurance or reimbursement, and you have to have these specific ICD-9 codes, and you potentially have to discuss things in a certain way. And so I've never even messed with it. When I was brand new dietitian, even before my low carb journey, I kind of looked into, what if I started my own practice? What would that look like? And the insurance reimbursement rates were so bad that I was just like, I don't think I want to do that. No, but yeah, the Academy of Nutrition has never come after me or come after my license. I wrote a book about what a clown show they are. I think as long as you pay your dues, they don't really care, which says a lot in my opinion. So
I can imagine a lot of dietitians and people in conventional medicine with the internet are starting to learn more and tune into what we're talking about today. I'd have to imagine a lot of those people who are starting to learn do feel handcuffed by their degrees and their positions.
Oh gosh, I have people email me, especially young people that just got into the dietetics field, that really are struggling because they're like, I am working I'm working in the hospital setting and everybody has type 2 diabetes and we're feeding them the conventional diet and I don't feel right. But then it's like, what do you do? Because I mean, some of these people, they're like, I'm the main breadwinner for my family, and I'm insurance for my family. You can't just say walk away, you know? So a lot of people are really, I think, get into it. And when they see like, oh man, this is not working or this is potentially harming people, they want to pivot. And, my advice would always be like, you know, you can't leave a situation where you're like, hey, I've got to take care of myself and my family. You need to do that. But can you explore something on the side? Can you see if there's other opportunities, whether it's, you have to be able to sleep at night. Like that will start to destroy your soul. Like, Jordan Peterson, like I've read both of his books. One of his chapters is do not do what you hate. you know, and if you are hating most I would think sane humans are going to hate doing something that hurts someone else. Is the whole point of our education and our massive student loans. Maybe that's just me, but is to help people, is to use this to empower and make people better. It really wears on you. So, my advice to any dietitian, or maybe you can use that experience to help particular groups that could really benefit from maybe, incredible endurance. There's some endurance athletes that are elite athletes that are going to potentially do better on a higher carb diet or other things. But yeah, working in the conventional hospital setting will like break your soul.
Riffing off of what you just talked about, something I wanted to get into is the fact that with the old, at least, dietary recommendations, as a dietitian, going into work, dealing with all these people with metabolic dysfunction and seeing them not get better, because how can they if you're telling them to eat the food that's causing the disruption to their health? That's got to be so demotivating and so frustrating, feeling like the work you're doing and all this education you've gotten is such a waste.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you're in construction and it's your passion, you love it, and you start building a house and you're almost done and you come back the next day and it's completely destroyed. You would be devastated. You'd be like, this is money, this is time, what happened was enough. And then you like, okay, we're gonna rebuild it. And you start again, and then you come back a week later and it's completely destroyed. Imagine that every day for days and days and days. And then you ask people around you, what's going on? And they keep saying, we're just gonna, it's fine. It's the building's fault. It just keeps being destroyed. You're like, something is clearly not right. And it really does. It really starts to wear on you and to break you. It's where I was like, I'm gonna have to go back to school and do something different because I'm not helping people. People are not getting better. And that's why I'm also, really big on the mental aspect and the psychology aspect, because you can have all the right information and you can still mess it up, but you at least have to have the right information if you're going to have a shot.
While you're sharing your journey and flipping to low carb, you talked about a period where you felt really shitty. I think for you it was a relatively short period of time. For somebody who today feels motivated, they're going to take on what we're talking about diet-wise. How would you recommend they begin? And would it be different than the way you did it?
Oh yeah, I would never tell someone to do it without I think I could have massively improved like headaches and all that by getting doubling down on the electrolytes. And that's another thing. We're taught low sodium, whatever. Your body needs salt, especially on a low carbohydrate diet. You're going to need extra salt. I probably would have invested in some bone broth, potentially some type of electrolyte supplements, whatever that looks like. And just being very patient. I don't think I was fully prepared to feel really bad, because I was like, this is bad. This is really scary bad. So if you feel bad for, usually for most people, it's 5 to 7 days, some people for a couple weeks, give yourself a minute. It will get better. We are such a quick fix society that if we don't feel, we feel bad for 30 seconds and we think the world is ending, just knowing okay, this it's a stress on your body transitioning from burning a lot of glucose to burning a lot of fat. Ultimately, it's going to be a really good thing, but it's still a stress, right? So just being really patient with that process. Also, I was really fortunate that there were a few people, I was talking with on Instagram that I could say oh God, I feel really bad. But if you have working with a dietitian, a ketogenic dietitian, or somebody who understands low carb nutrition, or a coach, I think that is really helpful. So you don't feel like, what am I doing? Or is this normal? I think that's a really good investment. People are so hesitant. It's amazing to me that people spend like $1,000 on a phone, but are like, oh my God, $30 on a console. So investing to help yourself get started, I think is a good idea.
To get really practical, somebody having high carb right now, say it's 200, 300 grams of carbs per day, and they want to embark on this, in the beginning, how drastically would you cut that down? And then over time, how does somebody know where their end goal is? Whether it be low carb, keto, carnivore, there's different endpoints. How do they know how far to push it?
Yeah, and that's such a good question. And again, like when I first started this and when I was newer into my journey, I was 1,000,000% sure like this is it forever for everybody. I just felt so good. But I've been in this space long enough to know that there are different ways to eat. And I would never tell somebody who's like, my labs are good, I'm metabolically healthy, I eat 300 grams of carbs a day. Like, okay, great. That's wonderful. I'm glad you feel good. Like, keep it up. Don't, if you're happy and healthy and doing something, that's fine. But once again, that is not most of the population. So let's just say somebody is eating 300 grams of carbs a day and they find out they will go to the doctor and their A1C is 6. So they're prediabetes. When we worked at Ona Health, we put them on a very low carbohydrate diet right away. And that can be very tough for people. But the theory and the hypothesis of that is, there's no more room at the end. So every time you eat carbohydrates, you're having a lot of damage. On the flip side of that is some people that I guess I could compare that a little bit to like, hey, if you've never run in your life, we're going to go run a 10K tomorrow. You ready? Like, and we're going to run 6 miles. You never run. Yeah. Good luck. Let's go. Maybe we should have you run around the block first, and so you have to know yourself. Like me, I'm kind of an all or nothing, let's go, hence going from million carbs to no carbs, but if somebody's like, I absolutely would never do that. It is much better to titrate down than it is to do nothing. Just like, people who don't exercise at all. It's like, if you walked 1 minute a day and increase that, you can, it's consistency and time that really makes results. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're metabolically sick, meaning, your A1C is elevated, your fasting insulin is elevated, really, really benefit most people from a very low carbohydrate diet. And you can define that. There's different definitions. I would even say 50 or less. Some people say 25 or less for a set period of time. I used to think, oh, we need to do this forever. Well, most people, once they become metabolically healthy, are able to add some whole food carbs back in and they feel fine. You're never going to probably be a 300, 400 gram person, but maybe you'll be 100, 150. I don't know. But we need to get your levels back down. We need to see that inflammation in your body is, safe. Where your A1C isn't elevated, your fasting insulin isn't elevated, your triglycerides aren't elevated. Ideally, your LDL looks good, your HDL looks good. Obviously, nothing's weird with AST, ALT, these liver enzymes, your kidney BUN. Very curiously, kind of side tangent, but a lot of people that I worked with at Ona Health had an incredibly high, A1C and blood glucose, and the lowest BUNs I've ever seen. Blood urea nitrogen, blood urea nitrogen is a kidney lab. We never want to see that super high because that's dangerous. But when it's really, really low, I'm like, because nitrogen is a breakdown of protein. You'll talk to them and they're eating almost no protein and just, astronomical amounts of carbs. It's really curious. I'd never seen that in my practice until working with severe type 2 diabetes.
Somebody who's metabolically deranged and their HbA1c is high, their fasting insulin's high, going low carb might be enough to start to reverse that. But there's also, with things like keto and carnivore, producing ketones in the body, which has other benefits. So how do you look at ketosis, ketones as being part of a protocol for somebody?
Yeah, and that to me really depends. Like I have some people that I've worked with that, like I'll give you an example, like severe migraines. Like I really want to explore what it's like to be in ketosis because, even though I'm eating low carb, I'm still having severe headaches because just eating low carb is not necessarily ketogenic. Ketogenic, just the definition, is a very high fat, moderate protein, extremely low carb diet. Because if you're eating like just this huge amount of protein, that can go back through gluconeogenesis to produce glucose. So you might not be in ketosis. And so in general, especially with people just starting out, I'm not super worried about that. Like most of the time, it's like we just gotta, even just starting by reducing the processed food. I'm honestly blown away. This comes back to our lovely education system in this country. How many people can't cook or don't know how to like very basic, brown meat, chicken breasts? Like, I know one girl kept saying like, "So how do I cook the chicken patties?" I'm like, "It's chickens don't come in patties." You need to stop going to McDonald's. Like, just very basic things like that. So just sometimes it's just getting people off and a lot of people just think carbs are bread. It's like, no, this is fruit, this is sugar, this is rice, this is plantains, this is beans, this is so many different things. But as far as ketosis, I mean, and obviously I can tell you the story of, my wife, like she had to be in ketosis. That was probably the worst time of my life, but I was so grateful that um, I knew about ketosis and I knew about its potential benefits for, things like oncology for cancer type things.
If you're comfortable, can you share that story?
Yeah, yeah. So it was um current my wife she works at a clinic. It's a series of clinics. She's the director and they do these like lunch and learn things everybody has to present. And in 2003, the director of imaging presented and this was in November and she came home and she was like, "We need to get mammograms." And I'm like, "Ow, I'm busy." And we were both 40 and she's like, "Come on, it's important, early screening." And I'm like, whatever, fine. So we both got mammograms and I got mine a little bit before her and mine was fine. And then I remember it was because it was 2 days before Christmas and she was home late. She got home late. I got home a little early. So I was playing with our German Shepherd and she just like walks in the door and, I'm not even paying attention. I'm just messing around with Jackson. And she goes, "Michelle." Yeah. I'm like, "What?" Messing around with Jackson. And she kept saying my name. And I looked up at her and she starts crying and she says, "I have cancer." And I kid you not, like my world changed. Like you just don't think somebody who's relatively healthy, who's eating low carb, who's, you know, 40 has cancer. And, the first thing I said was, "Okay." And the next thing she said was, "I'm so sorry. This is going to be so expensive." And we could probably talk for 2 hours about our healthcare system about that. We don't have to get into that. I mortgaged the house and worked 3 jobs. That was the last thing on my mind was how much it cost. But then I said, "Okay, you're going to be okay." And, that set in motion, connecting with the woman who wrote the book Keto for Cancer. I met her at a conference, Miriam. And immediately she was put on a therapeutic ketogenic calorie restricted diet. And I highly recommend anybody going through, um, oncology. Like I'm so grateful. I had heard of the work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried. I actually reached out to him via email and he was very kind, responding to my emails, giving us thoughts and ideas. And I mean, Corrine, I can't say enough about, you know, how she just immediately executed. Like she had the chronometer out and, she measured everything, weighed everything, never complained. I mean, I literally went to work that next day. I was working in a long-term care place, doing some contract work. And I just felt like I was in a fog. Like, oh my gosh, my partner has cancer. What do we do? And it's a really hard and scary process. You have to see the oncologist and then you see the nurse and the radiologist and then the surgeon. And I was just so glad. I cannot fully express how glad I am that we had that nutritional protocol because the only advice she got, and she even told me, Korean was like, "Do not argue with the doctors. We already know what we're doing. We're just trying to get this process moving here." The doctor told her, like, the most important thing is that you don't eat any animal fat. And I was like, like trying to say something, just, don't do it. But, the advice for people going through cancer treatment is just, eat what makes you feel good, eat whatever you can. And, obviously we still have a lot of research to do with cancer cells. And I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I certainly caught up a lot. And I did see like, hey, look, if cancer cells increase their glucose receptor. Even the American Cancer Society acknowledges that they increase their glucose receptors by tenfold. So perhaps we ought to not be flooding them with glucose, right? So She was originally scheduled to have surgery and then to have they said there were 30 radiation sessions. And after, yeah, did the MRI. And then when they went to do the surgery, which felt like a really long time from the time they did the MRI, it was only probably like 4 to 6 weeks. The tumor had actually shrunk to some degree. So the surgeon was really impressed. Like, whoa, that's pretty unusual. We don't usually see that. And so when we went to radiology, they're like, hey, you no longer need 30 sessions. You only need 5, which is a huge deal. Anyone who's had to go through radiology, like, unfortunately, there's lots of risk of it's radiology, like burning, scarring, pain. There's extreme fatigue. Like those days she had radiation was pretty bad. But, went back to the surgeon, several weeks after for a follow-up. And, I've talked about this before. He said, like, my God, it must be because you guys are young. Like, I've never seen someone heal so quickly. Like this, you can see the scar, but it's like, this is really impressive. And I just thought, like, thank goodness, and I've read different, publications on, ketogenic therapies as adjuncts to cancer treatment. And one of the main reasons it's discouraged, uh, people say like, oh, you're already going through so much. We don't want to give you an extra thing to do, which is the craziest shit I've ever heard. It's like for us, and I shouldn't speak for her, but I know she said this before. It's like you feel so helpless. Like you have this thing growing in your body, but it's like, this is one thing I know I can do that is helping me, that is going to potentially help me be better, be cancer free, get this out of my body. Because you do feel like, oh my gosh, this, it's a horrible feeling. It's scary. You tell someone they have heart disease, which is the number one killer. People are like, oh, whatever, we'll figure it out. And tell someone they have cancer, and it's like brings you to your knees. It's terrifying. So anyway, she's, this was 2024. She had her surgery. She officially, over a year cancer free. So we're extremely grateful. She'll probably get more frequent checkups for the next few years. But, it also brought up the question, like, why? Why is this not talked about? Why is this not encouraged, prescribed? And I remember listening to a podcast with Dr. Seifried, and he said, until someone can monetize this will never be a, practice because, cancer is one of the most profitable diseases in history. Like, it's just, you make so much money off cancer, even with great insurance. She wasn't wrong. It was astronomically expensive. So, but once again, we are grateful. I will forever be grateful for the work of Dr. Seifried and Miriam and, just the fact that we knew what to do.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm happy she's doing better. A few minutes back, I asked about ketones, and one of the areas in your book you focus in on, you read a chapter on mental health. For somebody dealing with anxiety, depression, which for you have been challenges in your past, how do you feel about that next layer beyond low carb, getting ketones to fuel the brain?
So, and the Bazookies just did a study on this too with college students, that people in ketosis significantly, or college students in ketosis had much improved rates of reduced depression. People with depression, they put them on a ketogenic diet, measured ketones. So I'm a huge fan. I mean, you're fueling your brain with a different substrate. And, one of the kind of theories on why this potentially works is, people potentially with mental health illnesses, maybe even people with eating disorders, they just do not metabolize glucose very well in the brain, and that manifests differently for different people. For some people, maybe that's, schizophrenia, they hear, or having audio or visual hallucinations. For some people, that might be major depression, major anxiety, severe fatigue. And so by fueling the brain with a different substrate, they can actually feel better. They can function. They're no longer dealing with those issues. And I think certainly if somebody's, tried other things, I hear people say, oh, I've tried everything. I've tried all these medications. I've tried eating healthier. Eating healthier is such an arbitrary thing. Like nobody knows what that means. But, and I like the ketogenic approach because it's very measurable. You can actually, with a keto mojo meter, which is easy and inexpensive, you can measure your ketones. And so for somebody like just like anything else, talking with Dr. Westman, Eric Westman, he's like, it's very safe. You have nothing to lose by trying it. And also, ketogenic nutrition is really the food is great. You're eating proteins and fats and very delicious things. So a lot of people who experience success eating that way often continue to do that.
In that chapter, one of the things you write about, and you touched on this, is insulin resistance of the brain. I'm curious, in your research, is that something that can happen independently from insulin resistance?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things for people with mental health is we all want to, if you're suffering, you want someone to say hey, we see that you're suffering. We see this value. Cause it's like you go to the doctor, hey, your A1C is 7, you have type 2 diabetes. We have an explanation for what's going on. And then we have a method to fix it. The conventional method, not ideal, but at least we have where you can go, let's say you have some young human has severe depression and they go get all their labs done. They go through all these things and it's just yeah, your labs are normal. Just think happier, go get some counseling. It's not helpful. So they're in complete physiology. Their blood glucose might be normal, their electrolytes are normal, fasting insulin might be normal. But once again, their brain is not working and not functioning. And that's not to say this person might not need some counseling or some cognitive behavioral therapy. But, just like a car, you wouldn't put diesel fuel in, a regular gas car. It wouldn't work. It would cause problems, right? Vice versa. You wouldn't, if a car needs diesel, you better not put the wrong fuel in it. So for these particular individuals, and if that's what's going on, if their brain is literally not functioning because there's, insulin resistance in the brain, I mean, it'll be magical fueling it with the right substrate. And if it's not, then, you've lost nothing doing that. It's a very safe nutritional approach.
I want to move into specifics with the diet. And I think a good entry point is talking about your diet. Can you give a typical day, what that looks like?
Sure. I mean, and it's changed so much since, writing the book. Well, I guess I can give you, when I first started, I was very low carb. I want to say, it was very boring, in the counseling and stuff I've done. People are like, oh, you should write recipes. I'm like, beef and beef. It's so boring. If I was single, it would be, yeah. I mean, I won't waste time on that. But, I definitely prioritize ruminant animals. I don't think that will be I don't think I will ever change that. And I'm also, through all the research that I've done, I've become a fan of the nose to tail. I posted on my Instagram recently. I got a heart, a big deep heart, 3-pound beef heart, and ground it up. I don't love some of the other liver and kidney, but I also value that. There's nutrition in that. So, we've been told not to eat ruminant animals. Most people associate that with beef, but that can also be lamb or venison or whatever. So I would say at least, I was going to say at least one meal, most of the time, 2 meals a day has beef. I had beef this morning. And then, the other protein. So, I normally eat 3 times a day, sometimes 4 with running. And it'll be some type of protein. After running, we make long fermented sourdough. I'll do some sourdough, butter. I do coffee. I've started drinking something called Unamate, which we can talk about. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so, outside of Portland, Oregon. So I do incorporate some salmon. Yeah, it's like I said, it's pretty boring. The starches that I would do would either be the long fermented sourdough. Sometimes I'll do some white rice or a sweet potato. A little bit of seasonal fruit, but pretty heavy still in the, the butter, the olive oil. When my training increases, carbohydrates increase. It's nothing too exciting or magical. But I found for myself and for my mental health, I've experimented going back, oh, would I benefit from doing more carbs? And I really don't, at least at this point, So it's not 50 grams anymore, but usually anywhere between probably 100 and 150 grams of carbohydrates a day. And I'm open, I'm always I never want to be dogmatic because that's how I feel like I was for a while when I was just following the standard guidelines. I think if you're metabolically healthy, doing a lot of distance running, or you're very active, you can probably tolerate more carbohydrates. But for me, 3 times a day, it's at least, 4 to 6 ounces of protein. In the evening, it's usually more. It's usually 8 to 10. It's pretty heavy in the evening. lots of butter, olive oil, like I said, sourdough and some rice. It's so boring when I say it out loud.
Just so we're not throwing people off because you are such a distance runner,
Yeah.
how different would the carb intake be if you weren't? For that average person out there who's metabolically unhealthy, maybe they're going out for a short walk. I want to make sure we clarify that carbohydrates are different in your case.
Yeah, if you're somebody who's like, once again, let's say you're trying to lose some weight, A1C is high, you have belly fat, all these different things, I would keep carbohydrates, like my wife is a metabolically healthy person, but she keeps them about 50 grams a day. So that means that, if you're having some vegetables, like her day would probably look something like I'm having some eggs or some sausage in the morning, then I'm having, a chicken salad with some nuts and some olive oil, and then the evening some beef and maybe like a small piece of sourdough, maybe the one carbohydrate serving a day versus the 11 that the former food pyramid had. So most of the nutrition, if you really are certainly trying to be keto, ketosis, you're going to be really focusing on higher fat things, beef, butters, olive oils, avocados, and you're keeping carbohydrates almost non-existent. You might have a single piece of fruit, a single slice of sourdough, a single something, but most of your nutrition is coming from a fat and then protein.
Are you a fan of fasting, either intermittently or longer fasts?
I am for metabolic health. There's people out there too that say that like, oh, that's super stressful on the body. I have struggled getting enough calories personally when I do that. But once again, like I'm coming from I rarely run less than 10 miles a day. So, but for somebody who's like, hey, I'm metabolically unhealthy, I think fasting, and especially intermittent fasting, because that's another thing humans do. You eat all the effing time. Like even when I was a kid, remember your parent was like, you can't have a snack. You don't spoil it. You're going to spoil your dinner. Now it's like kids have like, they're snacking all day. They've got chips and cookies and frappuccinos and all this stuff. So giving your body a break is a really good thing. Your pancreas was not meant to be secreting insulin all day long. Poor thing gets exhausted. Imagine you have to work all day long. So, for a lot of people, won't even eat their first meal till later in the day. And then they'll eat, like lunch and dinner. I know some people who benefit from doing the reverse state early in the day. Maybe they have their last meal kind of early at like 3 or even 4. There's different ways to do that. But yeah, I definitely think that can be a really positive thing, especially for people with metabolic illness.
Conventional dietetics, are they still being trained to tell people to snack throughout the day?
Yeah, especially type 2 diabetics. Is that wild? Yeah, when I was going through dietetic school, it was eating more will rev up your metabolism, which is interesting because every time you eat, unless you're eating pure fat, which, maybe if you're in the carnivore keto space, you might have a little bit of butter or coconut oil. But if you're having some protein or some carbohydrates, you're going to get an insulin response. And insulin, as we talked about earlier, it suppresses fatty acid oxidation. That it very quickly stops the body from burning fat. It says, oh, cool, we got all the sugar. Don't burn fat, burn sugar. So if you're trying to burn fat, if you're trying to lose weight, wouldn't it make more sense to not eat as often, not be having that happen as often? That's kind of what I always tell people, the paradox of the fat marathoner. You go to a marathon, and if you watch just like a full marathon, a lot of people who run are overweight. And that like blows your mind. Like you're running 40, 50 miles a week. How are you overweight? But think about it. You have carbs before, so you suppress fatty acid oxidation. You're eating tons of carbs during. As soon as you're done, you're eating carbs. You're eating carbs all throughout the day. You're never giving your body a chance to break down or even teach your body how to use your own body fat for fuel. And I'm not saying as an athlete you shouldn't have carbs or you shouldn't eat some carbs, but the traditional way of doing, exponential amounts of carbs, especially when you have excess body fat, not ideal.
When we were talking earlier about transitioning to lower carb, you mentioned bone broth and electrolytes. What supplements do you recommend for people on that end of the continuum, low carb, keto, carnivore, if any, long term?
First of all, I want to say, like, when it comes to supplements in general, I am like super skeptical. Like, I hate. There was one time in my life when I went to like a functional medicine doctor and they listed like, okay, you need to take all these supplements. And I mean, I was 25 and it was like 8 different things. And I'm like, oh, and they were expensive. And so I was like, oh, I don't know if I need this. But there are a few supplements that I take every day that I think are really important. Um, if you're someone who like eats nose to tail, I mean, it's just pretty rare, that we in all of our food is, obviously sterile. So I'll tell you, like, especially like, let's say you're listening to this and you're like, all right, I'm going to start doing low carbohydrate. But I want this transition to be as easy as possible. I want to make sure I'm covering all my bases. Um, I would start immediately drinking Unimate. Like when I heard about this initially from a dietitian, and then I was so skeptical. It's a yerba mate concentrate, put in water, you drink it, it's a tea. And I was like, you got to be kidding me, a tea. This woman was telling me it increases fat oxidation, it increases your body's own endogenous GLP-1, it increases the liver's production of glutathione, so it makes you less inflamed. And, I was like, yeah, I'm not interested. And she was like, okay, well, Dr. Ben Bickman is on the science board. And I was like, oh, I'll call Ben. Like, so, call Ben. I'm like, I should call him Dr. Bickman. I call Dr. Bickman and I'm like, do you believe in this stuff? Does this work? And so he sent me all these published studies. His lab did a study on yerba mate. And obviously, it's very popular in South America and Argentina. And I was kind of blown away because I'm a big coffee fan. I love my coffee. But yeah, so Unimate, once again, yerba mate concentrate, very high in chlorogenic acid, actually increases ketones. In a fasted state, increases fat oxidation on a cellular level. And I'm not trying to lose weight, but for me, I use it because one, very steady energy, also has theobromine, so you don't kind of get the like, ooh, ooh, of coffee. But the anti-inflammatory effects, like who do you know in your life that doesn't want to have sugar cravings, doesn't want to be achy, and potentially needs to lose some fat. So love that stuff. Drink that every day. And then electrolytes, like just getting that, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. There's so many different brands now, LMNT, and that doesn't necessarily have calcium with it, but gosh, I'm blinking on there's a bunch. Make sure you're getting some type of electrolyte supplement. And I take a separate calcium magnesium in the evening. I drink something called Cadence electrolytes. I don't have any affiliation with them. I just like it. And but those are the big ones, and collagen is another thing that I'm becoming more of a fan of, collagen and glycine. I mean, collagen is very dense in glycine, and of course, it has other amino acids. Just because we don't eat the like tendons and things of around meat most of the time, but I take collagen and then I take glycine at night.
One of the things you write about in your book is that the Academy of Nutrition is supportive, I should say, of a plant-based diet. Is that still the case? And then let's get into the nuances, because that word is very vague, what they're for.
Yeah, the entire academy was, I mean, you can read about it in the book. The story of how it came to be is pretty, even our nutrition guidelines, the initial ones came to be is bizarre, right? And I think, we've seen over the last several years, kind of that movement towards plant-based. I feel like we're starting to see people coming back from it a little bit. But the academy is mostly sponsored by processed foods. I believe they're still sponsored by the soy industry. A few of the other like plant-based drinks. And so, they still heavily proponents of whole grains and, meat alternatives. And they also stand behind saturated fat being bad for you. So yeah, it's bad. I mean, some of their continuing educations are almost embarrassing to read. Like it's outdated science. It's things like saturated fat being bad for your heart, or, eating every few hours being good for you. Um, hence, when I was a new dietitian, this is like 2009, they were sponsored literally by Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Soy Joy. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Even before I understood low carb nutrition, I'm like, you can't be sponsored by something and not, they have this really bizarre statement. I'll see if I can find it for you online about their sponsorship. It says like, our sponsors don't affect our policies or how we, I'm like, what the hell it does? What do you mean? This is sponsorship is for. You act in a way to represent these things you're sponsored by. Like, well, that's like politics. They give you money. That's why we shouldn't have corporate lobbying, but that's a conversation for another day. Gosh, yeah, it's so frustrating. I think it was 2014 that the New York Times published an article that the Academy was literally taking funds. So, they get funds obviously from people with their yearly fees, which I don't do. You don't have to do. And they were investing in Coca-Cola. And they said, "Oh, that's, once again, oh, that doesn't affect our policy or whatever." It's like, you're supposed to be representing all dietitians, and you're taking our funds and putting it in Coca-Cola. Like, I don't know, maybe you say that's smart investing and they're making money, but to me, that's a huge conflict of interest. Because don't you want Coca-Cola to do well if you're investing in Coca-Cola? Like, oh my gosh, it just makes me like, ugh, it just feels icky. It feels so slimy. It feels like everything as nutrition professionals we should be advocating against. We know these foods are bad. We know they're destructive to human health. We know that non-fatty alcoholic liver disease is increased exponentially with the increase of these sugar sweet beverages. Yet here we are investing in them. Get out of here.
It's crazy. And one of the things preparing for this, I've heard you talk about, and it really clicked for me, is the fact that it's not going to get dietitians saying, okay, Coke is something we recommend, or pushing it upon their clients. It's the middle ground where when people ask about it, the dietitian could say, okay, in moderation. Talk more to that.
So it's so brilliant. I just see these, because I never, I practiced in the clinic until 2019. I think I left, or in 2020 is when I actually left. And I never saw a dietitian go into a room, and I witnessed heart disease education, diabetes, you name it. I witnessed it and gave it. It never like in a handout it never said like drink soda, drink Pepsi. But if a patient asked, like, hey, I like Pepsi, what do you think about that? It was, oh, we'll just have it in moderation. Because if you're just taught moderation, then we don't want to restrict people. We don't want to, it makes everything so arbitrary because moderation has no definition. When I think of moderation, I think of like, oh, I don't know, once or twice a week. Somebody might think like, oh, that's once a day. Someone might think that's once a year. Someone might think that's 3 times a day instead of drinking it all day. But in reality, when you say moderation, there's 2 problems with that. One is the first problem I just talked about is it's completely arbitrary. It has no definition. The second one is it would be like telling someone to moderate, cigarettes. It's addictive. We have tons of research that nicotine is, cigarettes are addictive. So it's like telling someone to moderate foods that are literally designed to be addictive. It's like, here they are getting permission to eat these, but now they can't stop eating these because they change our brain chemistry. Yeah, it's horrible. But once again, it's such a whacked out system to where these processed foods are sponsoring the academy. So the academy is telling people it's okay to eat these processed foods,
Not to mention, we're in this position now where over 90% of people are metabolically unhealthy, and we've been living this radical lifestyle and eating this radical diet in moderation just isn't going to get us back to where we need to be.
No, and I mean that's one of my like taglines is we're not going to medicate or moderate out of this. Like you absolutely cannot. You have to say like I am willing to be radically different. And radically different, unfortunately, it should just be like I'm willing to live and be a normal human and eat real food. But it's so unusual to eat 2 to 3 times a day eating low carb real food. Like that is incredibly unusual. Um and it shouldn't be. It should be the norm. It should be like, hey, we eat 2 to 3 times a day. If you're metabolically healthy, you incorporate some seasonal whole carbs. If you're not, you just really focus on proteins and fats. But yeah, it's a mess. It's a big mess. And you see it even starting young. Like I get upset, my non-existent children are perfect. Always say that. Because Karina, I don't have kids. But man, sometimes I see kids. I visited my sister. I have 3 older sisters. My next oldest sister lives in California. And so right outside of Anaheim. So I was staying, Anaheim is where Disneyland or whatever is. And so I was running in the morning and I'm like, my God, like it was like hard boiled eggs with legs. What are these kids? Not just like chubby, but like obese. I mean, these kids are like 5 or 7 years old. Like that breaks my heart. That's not their fault.
And to piggyback off this moderation piece, to me, we got to talk about fruit because a lot of the fruit has been hybridized and it's just so sweet. I think a lot of times people can wrap their heads around white sugar, processed foods. But if you're in that position of these kids that you're talking about or somebody metabolically unhealthy, you likely need to cut the fruit out or at least drastically bring it down, because you're in a position again that is so critical and so far down the continuum that you need to be radical to get back.
I love that you said that, and I appreciate that, because this is where the confusion comes in. I see people arguing on Twitter, like, oh, fruit isn't bad for you. Nobody got diabetes from eating fruit. And if you're saying somebody's been eating chicken and salad and, walking a few miles a day and having a banana, then no, they're fine. That's no big deal. But if you are already metabolically sick, and I'll give you an example. People I work with at ONA, somebody whose blood glucose is 250 normally. Once again, we'll just say 250 waking. Normal should be under 100. If they eat an orange, their blood sugar is going to go to like over 300. Are we saying that oranges are inherently bad and nobody should ever eat an orange or they're going to spontaneously combust? No, we're not saying that. But we're saying, like you said, when you're so far down the continuum, you have to be drastic. In my experience, it behooves you to be drastic, to say, like, I can't have things. Because once again, your body is completely saturated with glucose. So you need to reduce or completely get rid of the glucose. And that's a huge confusion with type 2 diabetics. If you're a type 2 diabetic, there's no room at the end. That means, no carbohydrates. Once again, in my book, I use the hoarder's house. Like, there's nothing left. Don't bring anything else in. You need to get some of the stuff out by moving around and by reducing your carbohydrates so the body can burn some of it. So yes, fruit. I am, I just for whatever reason, I'm not a huge fruit person. I like some seasonal berries. I certainly can supplement my running diet with fruit. I think for young, I've got, and my nephew's 16, he plays soccer, he eats a bunch of fruit. That's fine. He's a young, healthy boy. But just thinking that people who are metabolically unhealthy should be eating a shit ton of fruit is a bad idea. Because yeah, it's very high in sugar. Can you eat fruit at some point once you reverse your, metabolic health? Most likely. But we have to take into account where we're at right now. That's why I would encourage anybody, like, you have to be careful listening to this person or that person, even me. Do your own research. But if you're very sick, you need to be focusing on what does your body need. If your body has extremely high glucose, your body doesn't need more glucose and it doesn't matter if it's from an orange or from a Snickers bar. Your body doesn't know. It breaks down to the same thing.
I think another good thing in that realm to talk about when it comes to plants is the anti-nutrients. So we have the sugar specifically in fruit, but then the other challenge is things like phytates, oxalates, lectins. Depending on the plant, you get the double whammy of the anti-nutrients as well.
That was my kind of extreme worry with people going on these very plant-based diets, especially like women and young women eating a lot of rice, eating a lot of quinoa, eating a lot of salads, eating a lot of things that have a lot of fiber, but also have a lot of phytic acid, which combines, they form covalent bonds with calcium and iron. And those tend to be two things that are relatively low in the human diet, And so once again, does that mean if you're a metabolically healthy person, you should never eat anything with phytic acid? Of course not. But that has become a very big part of our diet, these grains and nuts and seeds. And then we're not having a lot of the meats and fish and some of the healthier fats like avocados. And so when you do that, you potentially cause problems that we see. People have a lot of issues with we see more people with bone issues at young age, people that have a lot of issues with your teeth. Your teeth are bone. So if you're having a lot of cavities and other things, you probably need less phytic acid, probably more saturated fat, more minerals. Yeah. And so it's just, we kind of have the emphasis, in my opinion, reversed. Like we put this as much plants as possible and a little meat, where I feel like we need to have much more meat and much more fat and then use plants as a supplement to your goals, to your metabolic health. And yeah, I know there's some people that would disagree and say like, oh, I eat all these plants and I'm perfectly healthy. Great. I'm glad, but that is not my overwhelming experience.
When it comes to phytic acid, is it binding to nutrients just within the food that has the phytic acid? Or if you're eating a mixed diet and you're getting some good quality animal nutrition, is that going to affect the meat as well?
Yeah. Like if you're, let's say, eating something like just grains even, with, we see this a lot with, even with iron, they say don't take a lot of like tannins or don't have, some of those things. I'm trying to think of what other good example, like teas and coffees and stuff. You want to try to have that separate from what you're eating. And that doesn't mean like, let's say you have a cup of coffee with something high in iron, is you're not going to completely absorb any of it, but it is going to bind to some of that. So yeah, I just get so frustrated with the once again, a lot of people don't even know that. They think like I just need to eat. And I'm not saying once again the fiber is bad for you or that you should completely eliminate phytic acid, but just being aware. You need to see like where is my health right now? Like where are my goals? And that's another thing that if you are feeling super fatigued and you get a lab panel, I always encourage women too to get your iron checked, get your ferritin checked. That's something we often see is very low in women. So, and if your ferritin is very low, you really need to consider, increasing your red meats or even potentially taking a supplement depending on how low it is.
As you talk about iron and red meat, this is a good place to talk about bioavailability. And this is something you're big on, the fact that just because on a nutrition label we see a certain amount of something, when it comes to plants, those aren't always what you're going to end up absorbing.
Yeah, bioavailability is something. What is bioavailability? I mean, like you said, it just means what can we actually absorb? And I will continue to use this analogy because I love the fact that, like, if I wrote you a check and say, Jesse, it was really nice to chat with you. Here's a check for $1,000. And you're like, whoa, this is amazing. And you take it to your bank and they're like, this girl's got $17 in her bank account. And you're like, oh man, that's BS. It doesn't matter that I wrote it to you for $1,000. It matters, can you actually access the funds? And that's what bioavailability is. It doesn't matter that spinach has, let's just say, 3 milligrams of iron. Your body cannot access it and break it down. It is not very bioavailable, right? And so it's effectively useless to you, just like, unless they give you the $17, most of that $1,000 is useless to you. So you want to have things that have high bioavailability. And those tend to be things that are like lower in fiber and anti-nutrients, which obviously protein is, and a lot of the, fats, like some of the like fats, DHA, EPA, things that are high in fish, or even like, saturated fats that are in beef, they're going to be higher in, or they're going to help your body absorb those fat soluble vitamins, D, E, A, and K. So yeah, a lot of things in plants are just not very bioavailable. And the fact that they're not very bioavailable, meaning the human body can't use them very well. Once again, doesn't mean you can't ever eat plants. But to me, that means you should probably not depend on them as your sole source of nutrition.
You touched on fiber. Let's bring that in, a controversial topic.
Yeah.
Somebody eating the way you've been describing, generally they're going to really cut down on their fiber. If they're worried about pooping, their microbiome, bring fiber in and talk about how you think about it.
Yeah, my opinion on fibers changed a little bit. I used to be like, hey, nobody eats fiber ever. Who cares? It causes all these problems, because I saw people get supplemented with fiber, especially in the ICU. And it's not. I mean, if anything, it's like, hey, I'm having severe diarrhea. They get, these Benefiber packets, and it almost never helped. And, when I first started carnivore, low carb, and then ketogenic diets, very minimal fiber. It felt great. Had no issues. You have to make sure you're getting the fat. Over time, I think it makes sense to incorporate some type of fiber, because just like nobody was ever pure carnivore throughout time. We eat some grasses and roots and whatever during famine, and nobody was ever purely plants. Nobody was ever purely meat. So I do think having some fiber can be beneficial potentially at points for microbiome. But yeah, in general, I think we kind of overblow, fiber being this like be all end all helping everything, because once again, super high fiber diets, you're going to potentially bind to some vitamins and minerals. So I would say for most people, it makes sense, especially if you're doing a lower carb diet, just enjoy some of the fiber, or you're getting fibers from, avocados are very dense in fiber. You're going to get them from any type of vegetables you have. But I don't necessarily think that, going out of your way to have a massive amount of fiber is really important.
Okay, let's pivot off fiber into the microbiome as a whole. And your thoughts on fermented foods, probiotics, short chain fatty acids. Share your thoughts in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like Mary Reddick is probably a better person to talk to about this. But I do think, I feel like if anybody tells you like this is how to eat for the perfect microbiome, like you should be like, you need to get out of here because nobody knows. Your microbiome definitely reflects like things you've eaten. So whatever region of the world you're in, people eating different diets, their microbiomes are going to be very reflective of what they're eating. And they did do some studies on like, low carb ketogenic diets, and they had the same alpha diversity as somebody eating, a higher fiber, kind of more of the traditional diet. So, but yeah, I mean, we know that people have fermented things throughout history, as far as like yogurts, kefirs, the carbohydrate, one of the main ones I eat, sourdough, is fermented. I think there's something to that. I certainly think, when you have, fibers, you're going to have some of those short chain fatty acids, and that seems to be beneficial. But yeah, I don't know if it's just taking random probiotics. I wouldn't do, I don't do that. But I do think if you're going to be eating, I do think it makes sense to have some cultured products just because, that does, create some more diversity.
All right, last question for today. As we wrap up, somebody who has stuck with us throughout the almost 2 hours here, they're ready to take the plunge, drop the carbs. Let's give them the really high-level playbook of how they walk out of this.
Okay, cool. So you never want to feel deprived or hungry. I remember when I first started this, it kind of scared me how much meat I could eat, allow yourself just to, to eat to be satiated. I would focus 2 to 3 times a day, ruminant animals, like I said, beef, lamb, adding butter. If you like non-starchy vegetables, I think those are fine to add in as well. Drink a lot of water, take some electrolytes, get online. You can Amazon, Google keto electrolytes. Consider the drink Unamate. I have a link if people are interested in that to learn a little bit more about what that's about, or that's on my website. Yeah, it's really basic. 3 times a day, protein, ideally animal protein, a non-starchy vegetable if you want. Add a little bit of fat, whether that's butter, coconut oil, some avocado. I always say too, try to sit when you eat. Chill out a little bit. That helps. And repeat. Give yourself a full 30 days. I think people, you don't like it after a day or 2 days. Commit to yourself. Say, I'm going to do this. And so when your friends are like, hey, we're eating pizza, say, okay, I'll come hang out, but I'm actually eating this way,
And for somebody needing that hope piece, like we talked about early in the conversation, they've been knocked down by a lot of different diets over the years, a lot of different advice. They feel like the best they can do is just hold where they're at. What would you say to them?
Once again, your body and your brain have such a tremendous capacity to heal. And if you're somebody who you're going through it or you're struggling, maybe it's better for you to do like a step down approach. Like, let's say you're just eating like absolute garbage right now and you even know it. Okay, well, you know what? How about for the next week, we just drink water instead of soda? And then after that, instead of, and you can work with somebody that can help you really step this down. But there's nobody listening to this that is too far gone, because your brain is functioning, you have the capacity to listen to this. And also just connect with somebody, connect with me, connect with another ketogenic dietitian out there, commit. And you will be blown away. You can be a completely different person in 6 months. You can change your entire life in as little as 3 months.
All right, Michelle, we're going to leave it there for today.
All right.
Really enjoyed this. I appreciate you. I appreciate the fact that you've put your flag in the sand and stood up for what you believe in, had this big shift in your career, in your way of thinking. And I'm sure you've taken a lot of blows along the way, but you're keep on pushing forward and sharing this information. Thank you for that. We're going to link up your books, your social media, your mate, your website, everything in the show notes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Stick around here for this other great interview. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
Your physician is never going to care this much. They're not going to study you this much. You have to study you this much. That morning fasting blood sugar, when it only gets to 95 in the morning, you got problems. That's not normal. Yes, you're healthier than